You can fake strength, you can fake confidence, you can fake kindness, ambition, and discipline for a time. But there are certain subtle, precise behaviors that always betray the truth. And Machiavelli knew exactly how to detect them, because in his world surrounded by liars, opportunists and cowards, he could not afford to guess who was strong and who was simply loud. He had to know, and he learned quickly. Weakness doesn't shout, it slips through the cracks. While strong men remain calm in silence, weak men expose themselves through patterns they do not even notice. And once you recognize these patterns in your enemies, your colleagues, or even yourself, you gain an advantage. Machiavelli used it like a dagger, the power to identify weakness before it ever became a threat. These behaviors do not appear obvious. In fact, most people miss them, but Machiavelli never did. He studied men the way a predator studies movement, and he uncovered 3 behaviors that instantly revealed the weak. The first, and perhaps the most subtle, was over-justification. Weak men explain, strong men decide. That's it. A man who constantly defends his choices, over-explains his actions, or begs others to understand him, is not being honest. He is being insecure. Machiavelli saw this in court every day. A prince secure in his authority spoke little. But a minister, a merchant, a man pretending to hold importance, he spoke endlessly. He needed others to agree with his logic so he could feel sure of it himself. It is the habit of a man whose identity depends on being liked, not feared, not respected, but liked. And Machiavelli saw it for what it was. A man begging for permission to exist. Over-justification is only a smokescreen for fear, fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of power. And the truth is, any man who must gain approval before he moves will never be trusted with real power. Because power demands silence, power demands conviction, power demands the strength to act without explaining it to anyone. So the next time someone keeps repeating themselves, defending their stance, or trying to sound noble, kind, or correct, you are not hearing strength. You are hearing collapse in slow motion, but that was only the first behavior. The second was colder, weaponized niceness. The most dangerous form of weakness because it hides behind a smile. Machiavelli saw that the most spineless men did not always look afraid. They looked friendly, helpful, accommodating, but it was not kindness. It was submission disguised as virtue. See, a strong man can be kind, but his kindness is selective, deliberate, and never at the expense of his self-respect. A weak man, however, tries to be agreeable at all times. He agrees to avoid conflict. He compliments to be liked. He stays silent when he should speak. He apologizes, not because he is wrong, but because he is afraid. And when that fails, when being agreeable no longer earns him validation, he snaps. He becomes bitter, sarcastic, passive-aggressive. Why? Because his niceness was never kindness. It was a strategy to escape rejection, and when it fails, his resentment leaks out. Machiavelli observed this in public men constantly. He wrote that a prince must know how to do wrong, but not use it unless necessary. In other words, restraint is not fear, but weaponized niceness is always fear. It is the posture of someone who does not know how to stand tall, so he tries to stay small, hoping no one steps on him. And when you see this compulsive friendliness that turns sour under stress, you have found someone who cannot be trusted with power. Because real power requires boundaries, the ability to say no without apology, and the strength to face conflict without collapsing into false smiles. Machiavelli watched for this behavior like a hawk, because it showed him that this man's loyalty would shatter the moment it was tested. But the third behavior was the most desperate, the most exposed, and the most humiliating to witness. And when you see it, you will know you are looking at a man who fears insignificance more than anything else. The third behavior, the one that made Machiavelli instantly classify a man as weak, was display addiction. You have seen it before. the man who must always be noticed. The one who cannot sit in silence without recognition, the one who posts constantly, shouts for attention, exaggerates his victories, and turns every moment into a stage. Machiavelli saw these men everywhere, and he understood what many still do not. The man who needs to be seen fears being forgotten, and that fear is weakness. Not weakness born of poverty or misfortune, but weakness born of identity rot. Because display addiction is not confidence, it is panic, the frantic response of someone with no inner foundation. He believes that if he is not praised, envied, or talked about, he does not matter. His value disappears with the applause. And this is why Machiavelli considered such men liabilities. They will do anything for attention. Lie, betray, exaggerate, expose secrets, turn on allies, create enemies so long as someone is watching. Because in their mind, silence means death, stillness means irrelevance, and the greatest terror is to be forgotten. Machiavelli knew a man addicted to display is a puppet waiting to be controlled. And if you wish to destroy him, you do not need to attack. You only ignore, remove the spotlight. Cut off the attention, make him invisible, and you will watch him crumble. Because while strong men train in private, grow in silence, and strike without warning, the weak man cannot last 5 minutes without being seen. He is predictable, easy to manipulate, and impossible to trust. This is why Machiavelli feared weakness more than wickedness, because at least the wicked man knows what he wants. The weak man wants everything, but will trade anything to get it. And when you combine all three, the compulsive justifier, the false appeaser, and the attention addict, you do not get a villain, you get a void, a hollow man who will take the shape of whoever is stronger than him. And that was what Machiavelli feared the most. Not the loud ones, not the cruel ones, but the empty ones, because emptiness can be filled with anything, and when the wrong person steps close, they fill it with destruction. But here is where Machiavelli went further. He didn't just detect weakness, he used it. He turned these fragile behaviors into instruments, predictions, leverage. He understood that spotting a weak man early could mean the difference between power and betrayal, because these men don't break when tested, they melt. And in politics, in war, in business, in trust, you cannot afford to rely on someone who melts. So how do you protect yourself? How do you act like Machiavelli? You watch. You stop judging people by their smiles, their words, or their titles, and you start judging them by their psychological patterns. You observe what they do when no one agrees with them, when no one is watching, when no one praises them, or when no one gives them a reason to behave well. You search for the cracks. Because the strong man does not panic in silence. He builds, he sharpens, he prepares. The weak man, he performs, he explains, he collapses. And once you know the difference, you gain a weapon. Most people never even think to sharpen discernment, the power to see not only who someone pretends to be, but who they will become the moment life stops favoring them. That is how Machiavelli chose allies. That is how he avoided downfall, and that is how you outlast everyone, still blinded by appearances. Because beneath crafted words and polished images, behavior never lies. Machiavelli didn't just observe weakness, he turned it into a ladder. While other men reacted with anger or disgust, Machiavelli responded with calculation. Because once you know someone's emotional fracture point, how they think, how they panic, how they chase approval, you don't argue, you don't fight, you simply steer them. Like a rope tugging a puppet from behind the curtain, he realized something critical. The weak man craves to be led. He only resists feeling controlled, so Machiavelli gave him what he wanted: praise when he felt invisible, agreement when he felt unsure, flattery when he longed for validation, not out of respect, but because he saw how easily they could be molded. That was his true source of power. He didn't depend on brute force. He didn't force obedience. He made the weak obey themselves by feeding them just enough emotional sugar to keep them addicted to his approval. It worked like this. He would spot the justifier, the man who explained endlessly, and instead of silencing him, Machiavelli listened. He nodded, met his eyes, said, "That makes perfect sense." And instantly, that man attached himself to Machiavelli, desperate for more of that rare validation, willing to defend him, serve him, even spy for him, all because Machiavelli made him feel understood. But it was never understanding. It was leverage. Then came the people-pleaser, the agreeable, helpful, ever-smiling servant. Machiavelli gave him a role, a task, made him feel chosen, made him feel protected, as if he finally belonged to something powerful, and that man would never betray him, not out of loyalty, but because betrayal would mean losing the only anchor holding his fragile identity together. And then there was the display addict, the man starving for recognition. Machiavelli handed him the stage. He let him speak in councils, let him claim credit for ideas that secretly served Machiavelli's goals, let him wear the mask of influence. While in truth, Machiavelli wrote the script because he knew if you give a weak man the illusion of power, he will never question who truly controls it. This is how empires rise. Not through war, not through blood, but through psychological design. You identify the weak. You let them construct your palace out of their hunger to be seen, validated, included. And if they ever turn against you, you don't fight. You withdraw. You strip away attention. You let them collapse in silence. You let them tear themselves apart in their desperation to feel important again. Because nothing crushes a weak man faster than being ignored by the one whose approval shaped him. That is the Machiavellian mastery of weakness. You don't argue with them. You don't expose them. You use them. And as they scramble for applause, you remain still, silent, composed. While they chase recognition, you collect power. But Machiavelli had one more rule, perhaps the coldest of all. Never let a weak man believe he is your equal, because the instant he does, he forgets who created him. He overreaches, he dreams of rebellion. So you keep the distance wide. You reward just enough to keep him moving, but never enough to let him think he no longer needs you. And if he dares to challenge, you do not punish, you replace, because there is never a shortage of weak men desperate for validation. But there is only one you. That is the Machiavellian way. Not domination through force, but direction through instinct. Not managing men, but puppeteering their insecurities until they mistake it for loyalty. You need no title, no crown, no raised voice to rule the weak. All you need is perception and silence, because the finest manipulation does not appear as manipulation. It appears as friendship. It appears as mentorship. It appears as presence. And weak men are always watching, not for truth, but for signals. They move toward approval like moths to flame. And once you know that, you can bend their entire behavior without lifting your voice. This is how Machiavelli moved through courts, kingdoms, and alliances without ever needing brute strength. He let the weak come to him, and then he played the part. He became the quiet listener to the over-explainer, the steady leader to the people-pleaser, the unseen architect behind the attention-starved puppet. He did not fight their flaws. He fed them just enough to keep them performing, and in return he received effortless loyalty. He gained defenders without asking. He secured obedience without issuing orders. This is what you must grasp if you want true Machiavellian power. The finest control is the kind they never notice. It is when they believe the choices were theirs, when they think they chose to follow, when they feel proud to serve you, not because you forced them, but because you never needed to break it down further. First, speak less than they expect. The weaker the man, the more he craves verbal confirmation. So offer silence, calculated silence. Let them reveal themselves by talking too much. Let them talk themselves into guilt, into loyalty, into admiration, and when you do speak, make your words earned. That single compliment, that brief nod, that rare counsel becomes treasure in their mind. They chase it, they repeat it. Now they're not merely working with you, they're working for something inside themselves that you created. Second, be the calm in their storm. Weak men live on emotional reactivity. They panic when plans shift. They overcorrect under criticism. They unravel when ignored. Do none of those things. Remain composed, move with quiet intent, be the opposite of their inner chaos. This contrast makes you seem powerful without a single claim. They begin to think, he must know something I do not. He is in control. I'll follow. They project steadiness onto you because their own identity is crumbling. Once they do that, your influence becomes invisible and total. Third, reward unpredictably. This is the Machiavellian twist most miss. Do not praise on a fixed schedule. Do not become a predictable source of approval. Be mysterious. Some days you acknowledge them, some days you vanish, some days you nod, some days you do not glance their way. Why? Because uncertainty breeds addiction. They never know when your approval will come, so they keep performing, keep guessing, keep speaking of you. You become not just a leader in their head, but an obsession. This is where real psychological power begins. When they need your presence, your guidance, your recognition, they start fearing your disapproval. You need not punish them. Your absence punishes enough. You need not correct them. Your silence becomes their mirror. There is no escape. And now they belong to you. Not through terror, not through threats, but through a subtler bond. Dependency. This is the art of finding weak men and turning them into instruments of your ascent. And the beauty of it is they never know. They'll call it admiration, call it respect, believe they chose this path. But you will know the truth. You saw the cracks, you read the patterns, and while they scrambled in noise, you rose in silence. Just like Machiavelli, he feared one thing more than being dethroned, being betrayed by his own weakness. He understood what most people avoid. Weakness is not only found in others, it must be hunted inside yourself each day. It does not arrive loud. It sneaks in through over-explaining, the need to be liked, the craving for applause, the silence you failed to fill, the apology you offered not from error, but from fear. Machiavelli believed self-mastery is a constant war, a daily battle. Lose one skirmish, and the world will find your crack before you do. So he built a method to detect weakness the moment it whispered in his mind. First, he watched how he explained himself. When you are strong, you decide. When you are weak, you justify. He trained himself to notice when he spoke too much, when he repeated a point, when he altered his message to please the room. Each time he asked, "Is this conviction or a plea for acceptance?" If it was the latter, he stopped, because a man who begs for validation forfeits authority. Second, he tested how often he said yes. Many mistake yes for goodwill, but Machiavelli saw it as perilous. A weak yes can destroy a realm, agreeing to dodge conflict, to win favor, to avoid setting boundaries. He paused before every consent and asked, "Would I say yes if I did not fear losing their approval?" If the answer was no, he declined. No apology, no explanation. Because when your word loses weight, you lose power even in your own view. Third, he measured how silence felt. Weak men cannot stand silence. They rush to fill it with jokes, compliments, explanations, because silence reveals truth. But Machiavelli made silence his greatest weapon. He practiced it in rooms full of chatter. He measured his own comfort inside of it. And when the tension grew, he leaned into it. Why? Because silence, when mastered, transforms into presence, and presence, when mastered, turns into intimidation without any effort. Fourth, he resisted needless exposure. The weak man always longs to be seen, but the strong man, he chooses. When Machiavelli perfected invisibility, he watched as others chased the spotlight. He stayed in the shadows until every piece aligned, and then, when he finally moved, it wasn't viewed as progress, it was seen as arrival. He never built anticipation through words, he built it through absence. So when he spoke, when he acted, when he revealed himself, people stopped moving. That was no coincidence. It was trained, it was sharpened, it was engineered. He stripped away every trace of weakness from within before the world ever had the chance to weaponize it against him, because Machiavelli didn't just play offense. He shut every door others could later use to break him. And this is where most fail. They try to look powerful, but they never stop to ask themselves, do I chase praise? Do I fear rejection? Do I speak to be agreed with or to be heard? Do I need people to like me before I lead them? Do I explain when silence would have been stronger? These questions don't only expose weakness, they expose your limits. And once you see them, you have only two choices. Feed them and remain where you are, or kill them and become something the world cannot ignore. Because in the Machiavellian world, you are not punished for being ruthless. You are punished for being predictable, emotional, weak. So you strip it out piece by piece, word by word, choice by choice, until one day you speak and people freeze. You move and others adjust. You lead and no one dares question how you arrive there, because they want to see a man trying to look strong. They'll see a man who was forged in silence. Respect is never demanded, it is never requested, and it is never begged for. It is engineered. And Machiavelli held the blueprint. He understood that the highest form of respect, the kind that lingers when you re-absent, the kind that quiets a room before you speak, comes from one thing: mastery over what weak men fear. Most weak men fear discomfort. They fear being misunderstood. They fear being disliked. They fear standing alone in a room full of noise, but the Machiavellian man, he embraces it. He doesn't run from tension, he walks straight into it. He doesn't collapse under judgment, he sharpens through it. Because when you kill the reflex to justify, when you stop craving applause, when you erase every trace of fear-driven behavior, you become something alien to the average man. Something unsettling, something untouchable. And that is why people begin to respect you, not because you shout louder, not because you appear kind, but because you reveal nothing, and that terrifies them. It is human nature. We fear what we cannot define. So when you enter a room, needing no validation, when you stand tall while others shrink, when your silence outweighs their loudest words, you alter the entire dynamic. You don't chase respect, you become the source of it. People shift their tone around you. They choose their words more carefully. They weigh their sentences because they cannot afford to appear weak before you. Why? Because you have mastered what they haven't. You have killed the need for constant validation. You have silenced the voice that demands attention. You have made peace with solitude, which makes your approval priceless, and rare things are always valuable. This is the final Machiavellian principle: make your respect expensive. Don't hand it out, don't flatter easily, don't smile for free, make them earn it. Because once they realize charm, pressure, popularity do not move you, they will adapt to your standard, they will rise to meet it, or they will vanish. And either way, you win. You either forge stronger allies, or you expose the ones too weak to walk beside you. This is how you rule, not with loud power, but with power that is felt. The kind that makes people ask, why does his presence disturb me? Why do I care what he thinks? What does he see that I cannot? That isn't intimidation, that is presence. And presence is created by stripping away every behavior that exposes weakness both in them and in yourself. Because once you have done that, once you have purified your speech, refined your silence, and made your identity unshakable, You become what Machiavelli admired most, a man who does not merely command respect, he eliminates the possibility of denial, not through cruelty, not through threats, but through undeniable calibration. You become the standard others measure against the mirror, reflecting their insecurities, the quiet reminder that true strength never announces itself. So let the weak reveal themselves. Let them talk, let them beg for attention, let them chase comfort. And while they drown in noise, you build in silence with precision until the day comes when they cannot look away, and they will never understand how they lost to someone who never even played their game. That is the final lesson you don, to expose weak men by confronting them. You expose them by never needing to. That is Machiavellian power.